"If I share my cookie, will you stay?" asked the CEO's little girl to a poor single mom on the plane. The airplane cabin hummed with the familiar sounds of settling passengers. Rachel Harper adjusted her sleeping infant son against her chest. His tiny fingers curled into her worn cardigan. At 3 months old, baby Owen was mercifully quiet for now, but Rachel knew that could change at any moment. Her daughter Emma, barely 3 years old, sat beside her clutching a tattered stuffed rabbit, her wide blue eyes taking in everything around them. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she fastened Emma's seatbelt. This flight represented everything she had left. $200 in her wallet. A job interview in Seattle that might not even happen, and a prayer that somehow things would work out. Her ex-husband had left 6 months ago, and the eviction notice had come last week. She was 32 years old and felt like she'd aged a lifetime in the past year. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Emma whispered, tugging at Rachel's sleeve. Rachel's heart sank. She'd spent her last few dollars on the cheapest tickets she could find. There was nothing left for airport food, nothing left for anything, really. "I know, sweetheart. We'll eat when we land, okay? Can you be brave for Mommy?" Emma nodded solemnly, though her little stomach growled audibly. That's when he appeared. Alexander Thornton moved through the first-class cabin with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to doors opening before him. At 38, he'd built Thornton Technologies from a garage startup into a billion-dollar. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, his watch worth more than most people's cars. He'd just closed a major deal in New York and was heading home to Seattle, already thinking about the next acquisition, the next challenge. As he passed through to his seat in row 2, he barely glanced at the crowded economy section behind him. Why would he? That world had nothing to do with his anymore. But then he heard it, a baby crying. Not unusual on a flight, but something made him pause. Perhaps it was the quality of the cry, not angry or demanding, but genuinely distressed. Or perhaps it was the soft, desperately soothing voice of the mother trying to calm the infant. Alexander glanced back and saw her, a young woman with blonde hair falling around her tired face, bouncing a crying baby while simultaneously trying to comfort a small child in a pink dress. The woman looked exhausted beyond measure, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying burdens too heavy for one person. For a moment, their eyes met. Rachel's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as other passengers shot irritated looks their way. She mouthed an apology to no one in particular, to everyone in general. Alexander turned back to his seat, settling into the leather luxury of first class. A flight attendant immediately appeared with champagne and warm nuts. He opened his laptop, determined to work through the flight, but he couldn't concentrate. Behind him, he could hear the mother's whispered pleas. "Please, Owen, please, she, baby, it's okay." The little girl was crying now too, overwhelmed by her brother's distress. Alexander closed his eyes. He'd worked hard to separate himself from struggle, from need, from the messy complications of people who couldn't manage their lives properly. He'd grown up in poverty himself, a single mother. Food stamps, secondhand, everything. He'd clawed his way out through brilliance and ruthless determination, and he'd promised himself never to look back. But something about that woman's voice. "Excuse me," he said abruptly to the flight attendant. "The family in economy, the woman with 2 children. Can you find out what seat they're in?" The flight attendant looked surprised but checked her tablet. "That would be 2, 4B, C, and D. Sir, move them to first class. Whatever empty seats are available." "Sir, I'm not sure we can. I'm sure the airline can accommodate a simple seat change." His tone was pleasant but firm. "And bring them whatever the child wants from the menu." 20 minutes later, stunned, Rachel found herself and her children being led to the front of the plane. Emma's eyes went wide at the spacious seats. Owen had finally quieted, exhausted from crying. "I don't understand," Rachel stammered to the flight attendant. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake, ma'am. Please, Make yourself comfortable." As Rachel settled Emma into the wide leather seat, the little girl's face transformed with wonder. "Mommy, it's so big!" That's when Emma noticed the man across the aisle. Alexander had been watching the family settle in. Something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Emma stared at him with unabashed curiosity. Then, slowly, she reached into her mother's bag and pulled out a small boxta, cheap cardboard kind from a grocery store bakery. Inside were 2 cookies, clearly saved for an emergency. With great deliberation, Emma climbed down from her seat and walked over to Alexander. She held up one of the cookies, her small hand trembling slightly. "If I share my cookie," she said, in her piping 3-year-old voice, "will you stay?" The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. "Stay," he managed to say. "Mommy says people always go away." Daddy went away. Our house went away. "But maybe if I share, you'll stay." Her blue eyes were so hopeful, so utterly trusting. Alexander felt something crack inside his chest. A wall he'd built brick by brick over decades. This child was offering him half of what was probably her only food, asking not for money or help, but simply for someone to stay. Rachel rushed over, mortified. "Emma, I'm so sorry." "Sir, she doesn't understand." "No," Alexander said softly, his voice rough with emotion. He looked down at Emma. "I would be honored to share your cookie." He took the offered cookie with gentle reverence, and Emma's face lit up like sunrise. As Rachel pulled Emma back to their seats, apologizing profusely, Alexander sat, holding the cookie. It was a cheap store-bought thing, probably stale, but he couldn't remember the last time anything had meant more. The flight stretched ahead, and Alexander found himself unable to return to his work. Instead, he watched the family across the aisle. Rachel, trying so hard to keep everything together. Baby Owen, peaceful now in sleep. And Emma, that extraordinary little girl, sharing her precious cookie with her mother, taking tiny bites and savoring each one. When the flight attendant came by with menus, Alexander quietly ordered meals for the family. When Rachel protested, he simply said it's already paid for. "Please, azima achi her." First real meal in days. Fingers and fruit that seemed like a feast too. Hershey kept glancing at Alexander with her shy smile. "Thank you," Rachel finally said, her voice breaking. "You don't know what this means. Tell me," Alexander heard himself say. "Tell me your story." And did haltingly at first, then with growing ease. Rachel told him about her marriage that fell apart, about losing her job when she had to stay home with a sick baby, about the eviction and the desperate job interview waiting in Seattle. She told him without self-pity, just honest exhaustion. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "You didn't need to hear all that." "I think I did," Alexander said quietly. He was thinking of his own mother, working 3 jobs, coming home exhausted but always having time for him. He the bunso, determined to leave that world. Behind that, he'd forgotten what it taught him. Emma had fallen asleep, cookie crumbs on her pink dress. Alexander looked at her peaceful face and felt something shift, fundamentally inside him. "The job interview in Seattle," he said. "What position?" "Administrative assistant at a tech company. It's not much, but it has health insurance." And they said they might have helped with childcare. "What company?" Rachel named a mid-size firm. Alexander knew the CEO. "What if I told you I could make a call? Not to get you the job, you'd still have to earn it, but to make sure you get a fair shot and perhaps help with temporary housing until you get on your feet." Rachel stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Alexander looked at Emma, sleeping so trustingly. "Because a very wise little girl reminded me what matters. She was willing to share everything she had and only asked one thing in return, that someone would stay." Tears spilled down Rachel's cheeks. "I don't know what to say." "Say, you'll let me help." Not charity I meant what I said about earning the job, but everyone deserves a chance to land on their feet. the plane began its descent into Seattle. As they prepared to land, Emma woke up and immediately looked for Alexander. When she spotted him, her face broke into that radiant smile. "You stayed," she said, with pure joy. "Yes," Alexander said, and found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in years. "Yes, I did." At the airport, Alexander made several calls. Within an hour, Rachel had a confirmed interview, a temporary apartment arranged through one of his corporate housing contacts, and a starting fund to get her through the first month. She protested, overwhelmed, but Alexander was firm. "This isn't charity," he repeated. "This is paying forward what was given to me once. My mother worked herself to exhaustion to give me a chance. Someone somewhere along the way gave her the break she needed. That's all I'm doing." As they prepared to part ways, Emma tugged at Alexander's sleeve. "Will you really stay? Will we see you again?" Alexander knelt down to her level. "Yes, Emma. I'll check in on your family. I promise. Because I shared my cookie. Because you taught me something I'd forgotten. You taught me that the best things in life aren't things at all. They're people who care and stay." 3 months later, Rachel had secured the job. Not because of Alexander's influence, she'd genuinely impressed them in the interview, but because she'd been given a fair chance. She'd moved into a small apartment and had begun rebuilding her life. Piece by careful piece. Alexander had become an unexpected presence in their lives. Not as a benefactor, but as a friend. He'd started volunteering at a children's shelter, something he would never have considered before meeting Emma. He'd set up a foundation to help single parents in crises, remembering his own mother's struggles. And every Sunday, he joined Rachel's little family for dinner. Simple meals, nothing fancy, but filled with something he'd been missing from his life. Authentic connection. Emma always made sure to save him a cookie. Alexander learned that success wasn't measured in deals closed or money earned. It was measured in the people you helped, the kindness you showed, and the simple act of staying when it would be easier to walk away. All because a 3-year-old girl in a pink dress had offered him have a cookie and ask him to stay. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight. Sometimes it takes a child's wisdom to remind us what truly matters in life. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about kindness and human connection. Leave a comment below about a time when a small act of generosity changed your life. We'd love to hear your story.